Hey, this is Paige from Mosaic Moments, and I want to welcome you back to the Mosaic Moments design series. If you haven't already, check out parts 1, 2, and 3 before watching this video. Today, I'm going to be talking about harmony and unity. So it is two different design principles, but they go hand in hand with each other, so that's why I'm covering both of them today. So I imagine most of you have heard the term harmony in music. Maybe you're picking up that a lot of the same terms in music are also used in art. Because just like you're composing music, you actually are composing art as well. And so there is harmony in art. And what harmony is a pleasing agreement of elements in a composition. And the design elements share a common trait with each other. And then unity is when the elements create a balanced, complete whole that is pleasing to the eye. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the next layout and talk about these design principles a little more. So the way you achieve harmony on a layout is by using elements that relate to each other. And the elements of design are things like color and shapes. So all the shapes, the squares, rectangles, or the shapes of the dies you're using are the elements on your page. You can include texture, which not every page has texture, but if you were to emboss something, that would be texture on your layout, or patterns. Think about pattern paper. These are all things that are elements on your layout. And so it's really important for your layout to have harmony because it's more pleasing to the eye when all the elements somehow relate to each other. And generally speaking, if you make everything harmonious on your layout's going to have unity. And this design principle is really important because basically your scrapbook page needs to feel complete or whole. So basically what you're doing is you're harmonizing all the elements, you're using elements that relate to each other, and in the end you make one whole complete piece. There are a number of different ways to create harmony on your layouts. The first one I'm going to talk about is color. So for this layout, the colors were chosen based on the theme of the water park I went to. This water park's Polynesian themed, and I based the color more on the tropical colors in general. So I have the aqua color background. So yes, my background relates to my photographs. If you haven't thought about that, that's something to think about more when you're choosing your colors, is does it relate to the theme in my photographs? So that's one way I created harmony. And the other way, if you look at the bottom here, I highlighted these bright pink flowers and I decided to continue adding more pink on the layout. So as you can see, I took the color, that bright pink color from the flowers, and also added it to the palm trees. And so this creates unity because I'm pretty much communicating like these elements all relate together. There's the bright pink flowers and there's the palm trees. So these elements using the same colors repeating the same colors on the page can help bring harmony and unity on your layout. So if you look at the background behind the palm trees and the background of the square photos, you can see I also use that same pattern paper over and over again. And you can, of course, use more. I have another piece of pattern paper on here, but that is the focal point. So the focal point can be different, but the rest of the pattern paper is the same because, again, I wanted all the elements to relate to each other. Another way to create harmony on your layout is using embellishments that relate to each other. Now I want to point out harmony does not mean everything has to be exactly the same. Of course, she could have used one snowflake die and repeated it on her layout, and that would have made it harmonious. But here she added variety, which is also great to have variety. That's what keeps the eye interested in your layout. So just remember to have variety. Not everything needs to be exactly the same. So here she has the little 1 by 1 inch snowflakes, the 2 by 2 snowflake, which is a little bit different of a design. She also has the mint tins, and she has that little pattern paper piece on the top right corner that says snow much fun. So again, they're not exactly the same thing repeated, but you can see they all relate to each other. Just by looking at it really quickly, this is a page about winter time. Now, what if Jody put in a 2x2 seashell instead of a snowflake or something else that was just totally off? You'd probably feel really confused, like, what is that doing there, right? So make sure you use embellishments that relate to each other in one way or another, and together they will make one harmonious layout. Because like I said here, you know, just by looking at the embellishments, this layout is about winter. So in my previous video, I said I was going to talk a bit more about two-page spreads, so this is the first one of the video. And it's really important to make sure your two-page spreads are harmonious with each other, and therefore the two-page spread will make one unified page. So I hope that makes sense. So on this layout, I'm going to talk about the shapes that are used. So on the left side of the layout, you see I have all these strips. There's the 1x4 in the top, the 1x3, and the really big 1x10 square strip. So if you're gonna, usually with the two-page spread, you don't have to put every element, like you don't have to repeat every single element, but you want some of the elements to repeat on your second page. So here I had the strips on the left side. So on the right side, I repeated some of that strip look again. Now you notice not the exact same sizes were used. I repeated that 1x3 size because it was on the other side. And you can see a couple of them are going vertical instead of horizontal. But just looking at the two pages, you can see how they both relate to each other because those shapes are repeated. And again, harmony doesn't mean making everything exactly the same, and it also means giving variety. So you can see they relate, but they also are interesting to look at, right? If everything looked exactly the same, our eye would get bored and want to move on. But your eye wants to move around because it's very interesting to have a little bit of variety. And again, they still both relate to each other, and so you feel, you know, there's a completeness to the layout as well. So another shape I repeated on both sides of the layouts are the square shapes. Now on the left side, I want to point out real quick, I have the rectangular shapes as well, but you don't have to repeat every single element from one side to the other. So it's okay that the other side doesn't have a lot of rectangles. Like I said, you don't have to make the pages exactly the same and try to put every single element from one side and try to incorporate another. Just one or two things. So on this layout, I repeated, like I said, the strips sizes and also the squares. And you will notice on the left side, there are little 2x2 size squares. And you could, of course, repeat that same size on the other side. So size is also important. You want to repeat sizes sometimes. But even though I didn't repeat that same size, I still have that same shape. So on the other side, I have the 4x4 square right in the middle, and then I have the 3x3 squares circling around that focal point. So again, a way to make your two-page spread or even one-page spread harmonious is repeating the same shapes. And I also want to point out, repeating the same size of those shapes can also bring harmony to your layouts. And one thing I just want to mention really quick is another way to make your layout harmonious is by using photographs that relate to each other. Now, of course, you're probably not using the same photograph over and over again, but I just wanted to point this out because this is, of course, important as part of your scrapbook page design, but many of you probably won't have an issue with this because generally speaking, our page is about a certain person or a certain place, certain time. So again, you're probably already doing this anyway, but I just wanted to point out, you know, this is also part of the design is the photos you choose and that it's important that they also relate to each other. So here is a harmonious layout, and it's harmonious because, for one thing, they're pattern paper. It's that flower pattern paper. It's repeated, and it fits with the wedding theme. And there's also the 2x3 die cut, which also kind of says wedding to me. It's kind of an elegant design. Usually, weddings are kind of more formal and elegant. So these elements clearly relate to the wedding theme here. And also the 2x3 die repeats and again also relates to the layout. So on this layout, because I use 3 different 2x3 dies, it doesn't really feel harmonious anymore, and therefore the page really isn't unified. I have the 2x3 Tudor die, which could totally be used for weddings, so that's nice that they're there, but then I don't really repeat them on the other side, so it's a little bit unbalanced for one thing. But I also have the arrow die and the chevron die. Now, these dies could totally be used for weddings. Some of you out there probably used it, but in this case, it doesn't really go with anything else, right? They're very like the arch die is very organic and everything else looks so elegant, and the arrow die and chevron die kind of make the page lose that elegant feel, and you're kind of confused as to why they're there. So you, again, want to make sure your elements all relate to each other. When you're using dies, make sure they're dies. If you're going to use different dies, make sure they relate to each other somehow and not feel kind of random like on this layout. So here's a side-by-side comparison between the two pages, and my eye automatically wants to just keep looking at the left one. It has a feel of completeness to it because everything relates to each other, right? So on the left layout, you have the 2x3 die repeated. Now the items in the middle of it, so there's the heart dies and there's the Mr. Mrs. They don't repeat around the entire page, but they still relate. It says Mr. Mrs. and then there's hearts. It still fits with the wedding theme, right? And they also are balanced with each other. So even though there's some variety and some difference, you know that it's all related to the wedding theme here. Whereas on the right side, again, the arrow and chevron don't really relate to anything on the page. I guess they could relate to each other because they're both kind of arrow shapes, but really they don't go with the rest of the layout, and so my interest doesn't really want to keep looking, my eyes don't really want to keep looking at that layout because it's losing my interest really quickly. So on this layout, I have a Southwest themed pattern paper, and these photos were taken in Arizona, so of course the Southwest paper totally fit here. And the colors were also drawn from the pattern paper, except for the background. That grid paper was sort of just a nice neutral for the blues and pinks on the pattern paper to pop. So again, the blue mats relate to the pattern paper, and so does the dark brown mats. There's a little bit of brown in that paper too. So you want to make sure your colors relate. And if you use pattern paper, draw colors from the pattern paper on the rest of your layouts so they all have harmony with each other. All right, I'm changing it up a little. Now all the pattern paper is very different. So I have one piece of that pattern paper from the previous page, and then I have 2 other Southwest designs, and then I have one that is entirely random. So even though there's 2 other Southwest dies, you can see the colors are way different. The original Southwest has kind of more pastel color scheme, and the other one is really bright. And so even though they're the same theme, they still feel like they don't fit with each other because they're not the same colors. They don't have the same feel to them. And the other piece on top, like again, it feels really random. You don't know why it's there. We don't know why it relates. So it's really important to pick pattern paper. Again, if you're going to choose different pattern paper, that they all relate. All right, so I made this page and took it one step further. And now they have the mix of pattern paper plus they have these 2 purple and 2 orange background colors. And I imagine if you saw this page in person, you'd probably be confused and wonder why I chose these colors, because there's really no purple. Purple, this is not usually the right kind of purple to relate to the Southwest, and it feels like I suddenly put in these sports team colors or something on a desert layout that had a nice feel before. So again, make sure your colors are in harmony with each other and that they work together. In this case, I have these really bright colors that don't really go with that nice pastel look. And now this page isn't really unified like it was originally. So in comparison to the previous image, hopefully you can see how this layout just makes sense. Like you look at it and everything goes together, everything feels complete. Everything makes sense. I mean, hopefully from now on when you make pages, I hope you look at them and think, does this all make sense? Does it all tie together? And that's the point of harmony and unifying your layout, is that every element is tied together. So here you have that Southwest paper and the colors match with it, and it all feels like this lovely Southwest pastel feel. So this page feels a lot more whole and complete than the previous layout. So this layout shows the X Factor dies, and if you're using any of the specialty dyes and you're using them together, they are going to naturally be harmonious with each other. It's going to be a unified layout. So any of the specialty dyes, like I said, when used together, are just going to naturally create a harmonious and unified layout. Mainly the key here is I use the same color throughout the same spread because it looks a little bit more cohesive that way. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty straightforward and easy to use to make a unified layout with the specialty dyes. Alright, this is a really subtle change, but one way you can lose harmony in a specialty dye layout is if you use a different dye in your design. So here I replaced the 2x4 X Factor dyes with the 2x4 Clover dyes, and as you can see, they don't line up like the X Factor dyes, but also it loses unity in that the X Factor dyes have these nice straight lines, and the Clover dye has a more organic line. You can see that they have curves in it, and so it kind of just loses its unity and it loses its harmony because it's such a different shape from the X Factor. So even though it seems like a fun idea to mix up these dyes once in a while, and some of them work, some different dye collections can work with each other, but you definitely want to be careful and again make sure they do relate to each other and that they fit with each other really well, which most of them don't. And in this case, they are both very different from each other. So here is the side-by-side comparison, and it's really subtle, but on the left layout, I have all the X Factor dyes. They all connect with each other. They all create beautiful shapes together, and your eye is drawn and circles around the entire layout. Whereas on the right layout, the Clover dye, which the Clover dye is beautiful when it's used with the other Clover dyes, but when you are trying to make an X Factor page, the Clover dye interrupts the design, and it kind of feels random, and you kind of don't know why they're there, right? It doesn't have the same feel as the page on the left, so be careful when you're trying to mix different dye collections. Some of them can go together. They're not often designed to go with each other, but sometimes you can get away with it, but it's pretty rare. And so you want to make sure they match up with each other if you're using two different ones. But in this case, the Clover design is a completely different organic kind of shape, whereas the X Factor has these nice straight lines, and now they don't really relate to each other and they lose the unity of the whole layout. If you have been wondering when the 2-page spreads are coming up, we're now getting to them. So the rest of the layouts are going to be the 2-page spreads, which again, really important to make sure the 2 pages are harmonious with each other. So on this layout, this is a really nice prom layout. It has, what's unifying about the 2 pages here is Tammy used that same pattern paper on both sides, and she cut them into 1 by 1 inch squares on both sides. And all those little squares, she took the time to put chalk. That is pink chalk ink. That was not part of the pattern paper. So she made the 2 pages unified by repeating the Mosaic cut pattern paper. So this is a really subtle change, but on the right side now, I filled in the spaces with 2 by 3 photographs. And it's not like the 2-page spread looks bad or anything, but it also looks more unified and more harmonious with that pattern paper on both sides. It both is pretty clear that they both relate to each other, really. Like I said, it doesn't look bad the way it is now, but I think just putting in those little 1-inch squares really pulls the 2 pages together more. So even if it's Even a little bit of change can really make a big difference on your two-page spread. So now that we've talked a little bit about harmony and unity, you can probably automatically see that these two pages do relate to each other and tie with each other. They're using the same elements across the two pages. And one way is through repeating this crystal die. This is one of my favorites, by the way, for winter pages. So, and you can see how on both pages she has them going diagonally too. So that kind of direction repeats. So one thing that an element that can repeat between your two pages is direction. So again, here the crystal dies are going the same direction on both pages, and it's the same die repeating. It has the same colors, and so you can tell just from that the two pages are related to each other and have harmony. Another way Jody also created harmony between the two layouts is using kind of the same pattern. So if you look on the bottom left corner on the left side of the layout, there's the flower pattern paper and there's that solid piece of cardstock. She repeats that on the other side of the same layout, but you also notice on the right layout of the whole two-page spread, she also repeats that pattern. There's the pattern paper and the solid cardstock block. So that's another way you can unify your layouts. It's something like this. It's really easy, super simple. But if she had not repeated that cardstock, it wouldn't have the same feel. I mean, it would probably still look okay, but I think her repeating that really unifies and ties the two layouts together, which gives the layout a complete feel to it. Really quick, here is another page where you clearly can see that the two pages have harmony with each other and they're unified by using the circle dies. So on the left I have the 2x2 and 3x3 circle dies, and I repeated those exact shapes and sizes on the other side. Of course, the pattern on the right side is a rotational layout, or we call it pinwheel layout. So that's how you can add varieties, by using two different page patterns, but they are unified by using similar elements between the two pages. Alright, so to create a harmonious two-page spread, you don't have to use the same exact dies on the other side necessarily. Here I use the Beachcombers die set, which comes with these 3 dies, the 2 different shells and the starfish. So on the left you can see I just used 2 of the dies, and I didn't repeat those dies at all on the other side. But saying that, on the other side, I did use the shells, which relates to the beach, and it relates to the dies on the other side. And I also created the same look. So even though it's a completely different die, I still used the sand-colored paper, and I repeated the look with the 2 different orange tones in the shell design. So that's how I tied the two together, even though they don't use the same exact dies. Alright, so I changed things up a little. Now on the right side I have the diamond die. As you can see, I still used a sand color background. I have the diamond die part is orange, so the colors are the same, but the die is totally different. Right? So the diamond die here, I consider it a neutral design. It can kind of go with everything. In fact, our designer Danielle used it on a beach page. But on her layout, the whole page was just that diamond die. Here, it doesn't really relate to the other side, right? It just, again, feels sort of random. So now my page really isn't harmonious. Now it feels like the right side, even though it has the beach photos, which relates, the diamond mine dies feel sort of random, right? It makes more sense to have those shell dies. So again, if you're going to use a different die, make sure it relates and it's very clear that it does relate to the dies you used on the other side of the two-page spread. So I brought on this page just to give you a reminder that not everything necessarily has to repeat, although embellishments are something I normally would repeat in most cases. In this case, on the left side, you see there's that one 2x2 shell. Now, other than that shell, Most of the other elements repeat on the right side, so both sides use the same pattern paper, and they also use the same brown and green photo mats. So a lot of the other elements are repeating on the other side, and the shell, it's okay that it's by itself. For one thing, it's in the exact center of the layout. So it is balanced. If you have something in the center, it's automatically balanced. Now, if I had it in the corner somewhere, I would definitely want to make sure that that shell is balanced in the other corner or something like that. But it's in the middle, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to repeat. It actually looks really nice that it's there alone because it stands out. It's the only embellishment on the entire 2-page spread. So you don't necessarily have to repeat these die embellishments, but you do need to make sure that a lot of the other things are repeating, such as, again, the pattern paper and the cardstock colors are repeating on the 2-page spread here. Alright, on this 2-page spread, I want to put your attention on the right side of the layout because there's that one oval frame. Now, this oval frame could possibly repeat on the other side. We do have some 4x5 ovals, so you could repeat that shape. But I want to point out on the right side that oval frame is where the focal point is. That's the focal point of that layout. And the nice thing about having that one oval shape on that side is you could argue that's the focal point for the entire 2-page spread. And I would go back if you haven't. Our last video was about focal points, so hopefully you learned more about that in our previous video. But it's okay that the oval frame doesn't repeat because, like I said, it's the focal point's one of the things on the layout that definitely does not have to repeat because you want the focal point to stand out in comparison to the rest of the layout. So again, that's not something that necessarily, it can repeat on the other side of the layout, but it doesn't have to. But again, on this layout, the colors repeat and the little flower dies also repeat on the 2-page spreads, and together they have harmony and they're unified. So my last video, I did bring up 2-page spreads and the issue of using the same exact pattern twice. And in the last video, I talked about how you have two focal points that are competing with each other. So that's part of the issue. This layout doesn't really have a focal point at all. But something to remember about harmony and unity, and I talked about it earlier, is you still want variety. You don't want the exact same thing repeated necessarily. And, imagine if a song was the exact same note over and over and over again. It would not be a very fun song to listen to. It would actually be very annoying. And so that's kind of what's going on here is you have two spreads and since they're exactly the same, they're not interesting. You go from one layout and it may seem interesting, but then by the second layout, you're kind of like, okay, I'm done. So music is wonderful because there's multiple notes in a song and they all kind of fit together, right? And they make a wonderful composition that we love to listen to. And it's the same thing in art. Repeating the same note, we can say each page is its own note, and repeating that note gets really boring. Whereas two different notes that go together make a beautiful composition. And this is why harmony and unity are important, because harmony, like I said, doesn't mean you do the exact same thing. It means you're using similar or even repeating some of the same elements over and over again to make one beautiful, unified composition. So even when you are using specialty dies, it's important to use two different page designs on a 2-page spread. And so on the left here, I have so these are the sweetheart dies, and the sweetheart dies, when you use them all together, they make a connecting heart shape, or it's also a flower shape. So together these dies make a wonderful shape on the layout. And I didn't want to repeat that again because, like I said, that looks really boring. So on the right side, I decided to make a pinwheel layout, which is what I commonly do with the specialty dies. On one side, on the left side, it's actually a 3-column layout. Even though it makes the one shape, if you really look at the squares and rectangles, you can see it makes a 3-column layout. And so on the right side, a lot of the time, I will make a pinwheel page. And so I tied the 2 pages together by only using the 3x3 sweetheart die on the other side. So it's important to repeat at least one of your specialty dies on the other side. You certainly don't have to use all of them, but I did repeat one of them, and in the middle we do have a 2x2 sweetheart set, which is great as a little accent for your 2-page spread. So that's how I tied the 2 pages together, by repeating at least one of the dies on both sides. So I really wanted to show you a 2-page spread. So here has the 2 sweetheart die designs on both sides, and I want to ask you right now, how do you feel looking at this? And I'm going to say, you know what's funny, when I've repeated the same page, and you would think it would feel organized, but instead I feel chaos. I feel like my eye doesn't really know where to go because the focal points are exactly the same. Everything looks exactly the same. And so I feel like there's no direction because your eye is not really flowing between the 2 pages. Now my eye is feeling like I don't really know where to go here. So making the 2 pages the same is not truly harmonizing. Harmony, in order for it to work, needs variety. Even though all the elements need to be similar and relate to each other, it also needs variety in order for the composition to be overall beautiful, right? And the 2 pages, I suppose, could be unifying, but again, it kind of looks boring. So the composition itself is just not interesting when we repeat the same shapes over and over again. All right, so here's the original 2-page spread again. As you can see, this layout has much better harmony. It's not repeating the same layout again. Instead, the one layout on the left is kind of like your main feature, kind of the focal point page, we can say, and on the right, it's a secondary layout, I would say, but it still harmonizes with the left side of it. It still has some repeating elements, and so the pages beautifully tie together, making one unified layout. Right, so I know you need some more ideas, so I'm going to show you a few more layouts with the specialty dies. So one solution is using the same layout but mirroring it. This is really easy. This is considered a freestyle pattern, so if you go to the pattern gallery and look at our freestyles, those are some of the best ones to mirror, and together they make one symmetrical layout. And you can see how the 2 pages are unified and harmonized with each other. They use the same elements. They both use the diamond mine dies. They're just mirroring each other. So this is one solution. If you don't want to make a pinwheel layout necessarily like I did before for your second page, you can mirror the 2-page spreads. Now, this does not work for patterns that are symmetrical because clearly it's going to look exactly the same. And I also don't recommend it with pinwheel layouts, even though you can mirror it. It looks so similar when you mirror it. It almost doesn't look like it's mirrored because it looks too similar, so I don't recommend it with pinwheel layouts either. But totally great if you can do it with rows or freestyle layouts. All right, here is a 2-page spread with the X Factor dies. So on the left, you kind of have that original and classic X Factor design. It has the 3x4 and the 4x4 X Factors. And then on the right is the 2x4 X Factor dies. So as you can see, I actually did not repeat any of the X Factor dies, not the exact same ones, but I still kept all the dies in the same collection. So that is something you can do. You don't have to repeat the exact same dies on both sides, but as long as you use the ones from that collection, you're good. And what I did here for this 2-page spread is I repeated the rows. So if you look at the entire 2-page spread, there's 3 different rows. So that's another thing you can do for your 2-page spreads. That's still harmonizing, is just making everything line up in different rows. Now you can't do this with every die collection, but this is really neat that we have the 2 dies here. So on the left is the Clover dies, and that has the typical Clover die look. And on the right, I did not use any of the Clover dies at all, but I did use our die called Lucky Charm, and it was specifically designed to match with the Clover dies. So it has that same exact design, right? If you look at both of them, they both have the same design. The Lucky Charm is just smaller. So, like I said, we don't have this for every die. I said the Sweetheart ones have the 2x2 die, and I know this one has the Lucky Charm. But this is another idea is, again, the same exact dies aren't repeating, but that same overall look is repeating again. So that's what unifies the two layouts between each other, and also the colors used. If you look at both the Clover dies and the Lucky Charm, both of them have a plum colored outline, and then they have that distressed ivory look in the middle. So that's also how I unified the two designs on this 2-page spread. Alright, so here's another 2-page spread. As you can see, if you're familiar with their dies, this one features the corner cutout dies, and on the right side, right in the middle, has the 4 corner cutout, and it's the only one on this page. And you can also probably see the 2 pages are unified and harmonized because the pattern paper is being repeated, and so are the matte colors. All the mattes, the photo mattes on this page are all the dark cocoa brown. And also the corner cutout dies are also repeated. So this last, well, I have one more page after this one, but this is kind of going to be a summary of what I've been talking about through the whole video. But as you can see on the right side layout in the middle, this is the focal point. I would even argue it's the focal point of the whole 2-page spread. And it's because it's in the middle, and it's also the only shape with the 4 corner cutout. So the 4 corner cutout kind of looks like a big plus sign. So it's the only one, and it wasn't repeated on the left side. And again, that's okay because it's the focal point of the layout, which if you watch your focal point video, the focal point doesn't necessarily have to repeat because you want that to stand out. But obviously it still does need to relate. Here it does relate because it uses the same color background as everything else, and it also has a photo that clearly is the same subject as everything else on the layout. So on the right side of the layout, you can see it has the corner cutout 4x4 dies on each corner, and they rotate around the middle. And then on the left over here, you can see the same exact dies again, and you can see how they also rotate around the center. So these two layouts are harmonized because they use the same dies, plus it uses the same motion, basically. Even though on the right side, they're a little more spread out. Obviously on the left side, they were closer together, but again, they're the same shape, and what they share between the two of them is the same motion from the way they're placed around the middle of each spread. Alright, so this is the last layout of the day. I'm bringing this on here because this is the one exception to the no repeating page patterns rule, unless of course you can mirror it. This is pattern number 160. And as you can see, it's all 1x1 inch squares. So the real purpose of using this layout is to create a mosaic like this one. And as you can see, it makes one big unified mosaic look between the 2-page spreads. And nothing really feels repeated because it's all a bunch of different photographs, and they were all blended together to make it look like as if this is one big image. So for those of you who are not familiar with our old Mosaic pages, this is what we used to do. This is kind of like the original look we did. And this is not one big photograph blown up. This is actually lots of different 4x6 photographs. So that's pretty amazing right there. This 4x6 photographs that were blended together to make this one big look. And so it's automatically unified because again, it's just making one big mosaic look, right? And as long as the photographs relate, which generally you guys are good at that, so you usually wouldn't have this lake picture and then next to it is a snowy mountain. I mean, then it wouldn't be unified. But it's unified through the photographs, and that's the main point of the mosaic, is it's really featuring just photographs. And another thing I want to point out is the 2-page spread is also unified because there's that mountain in the background and you can see it spreads between the 2 pages, and that kind of helps them be unify and be harmonized with each other. Alright, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I know this video was a little bit longer than normal, but hopefully you saw the importance of harmonizing and making sure your pages are unified, especially if they are 2-page spreads. And the main question to ask yourself, so the next time you make a scrapbook page, just ask yourself, do my elements relate to each other? And does my layout look like one unified whole? So as long as you answer those questions, you'll be able to create harmony on your layouts. And if something seems out of place or doesn't feel like it belongs, you can always replace it with something that does. Anyway, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys have been enjoying this series and have been learning a lot. Alright, I'll see you next time.